What a day it's been in Sooner Nation. We got so many things to talk about, mostly from the transfer portal. We'll talk about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners Live. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners. Thank you for being here with us. And off the top, Josh, we got to talk about Jordy Ball entering the transfer portal after 2 seasons with the Oklahoma Sooners, 2 national championships, the NCAA tournament most outstanding player. Man, what a shock this is, not just to Sooner Nation, but to the softball world.
Yeah, I mean, complete shockwaves through Sooner Nation and through the college softball landscape. It totally reconfigures everything I think we know about college softball. So Oklahoma, still a great chance that they're the favorite going in for a 4-peat next season, but it won't be, at least right now, where we sit today. Nicole May, fantastic. Kirsten Deal, number 1 rated pitcher in a class for a reason, right? And so her growth combined with Nicole May, Oklahoma's going to be okay. Oklahoma's really, really good. But that feeling where each of these past 2 postseasons before Jordy Ball gets hurt the year before, you know, you don't want to say it was a foregone conclusion, but it felt like it was – to steal a t-shirt out there, Oklahoma versus the world. It was, are you taking OU or are you taking everybody else out there? It was so clear that Oklahoma was the best team. And now that's gotten leveled a little bit. But I will say, given that, you know, in recent weeks, 1 or 2 posters out there puts egg on every Oklahoma fan's face. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out in this situation, Oklahoma fans were so positive, so uplifting. I thought they hit all the right notes today with Jordy Ball when it would have been easy to take the opposite approach. And I think people get it. You know, for Jordy to be as accomplished as she is at Oklahoma and then to want to go home, people seem to have gotten that. But look, it stinks from a softball standpoint for Oklahoma. You look at it and you say, I mean, there's a part of you, John, that looks at it, or, you know, me or anybody else out there that looks at it and says, I mean, well, why would you want to leave this thing? And then I think the draw to go home, people get that part of it.
Yeah, if you've ever experienced homesickness, then you understand this. And I think most people can relate to that to some extent. Now, whether you make a decision that gets you closer to home or not, that's a question. I know for my family and I, when we lived in Ethiopia, we lived there for a long time, like, 5 years, which is a long time. I mean, we'd come back to visit in the States, but we had a longing to be near family as well. And that was a big draw because family is such a huge part of our life. My family, my wife's family, our siblings, cousins, all that, it matters. And being halfway around the world, it was a challenge for us as well. And so I totally get where she's coming from on the desire to be near family, to be, in a place that's home for her. And, I think what you said about everybody kind of hitting the right note. And I think some of that goes to kind of the big push that's been made in collegiate athletics to be more conscientious of the mental health aspect of college athletes. I think that's part of where some of this comes from, is just understanding, like, okay, I mean, she locked in and she toughened up for 2 years, and really this last year in particular, and, did what she had to do. She finished the thing, she finished the season and was arguably the best player in college softball over the last 2 months. And so now it's just time to kind of debrief and, take a breath and, find something that's going to be good for her. And that's okay. So much of life, honestly, can get bogged down, or you can get beat down. And if you have options like Jordy Ball has, then man, more power to you to take advantage of those options and to be able to go back to where it all started, as she said in her statement announcing the decision. So, from just a person's perspective, as I was kind of reflecting on this and, just trying to process it all and what it all means, I think it would be really easy for her to stay, and to struggle, you know what I mean? Like sometimes the easy decision is the one to stay. And it's a hard decision to give up something like being the ace of the Oklahoma Sooners, the number one team in the nation, coming off of back-to-back national championships. It's harder to make that decision and to go. And while it's a tough one and it's a loss for the Oklahoma Sooners, I mean, you got to admire her ability and her willingness to make the tough decision. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that just follows her characteristics, right? She's tough. She's battle tested. She's not willing to shy away from the difficult situations. And, this was a tough decision. I'm sure it was an agonizing one, a painstaking one. And something that she dealt with over the last, few months. It sounds like, based on Patty Gasso's statement, is that, she'd been feeling this way for quite some time. And, this is one of those things that, when the heart knows what the heart wants. And, thank you, Jordy Ball, for what you did and just providing the excellence that you did and the fantastic entertainment and what you did for the sport of softball altogether. I mean, she was must-see TV, not just for Oklahoma fans, but I mean, when her and Najari Kennedy, went toe-to-toe, it just reminded me of some of those great, pitching matchups that we got to see in the ALCS, between Pedro Martinez and Roger Clemens, and just the great battles. And that's kind of what it was. This Women's College World Series is just fantastic theater. And, this is one of those, more power to her. Congratulations on getting to make this move. And we'll miss you, obviously, in Norman. But what a career she had. I mean, I wrote it over at Sooners Wire that she left a legacy and she is a legend at Oklahoma, even though she only played 2 years. She has more years than Kyler Murray does, and Kyler Murray's got a statue on OU's campus because of his Heisman Trophy. But Jordy Ball was just as impactful in her time in Norman as well.
Jordy obviously leaves as a legend at Oklahoma. Multiple national champion winner, most outstanding player, was flat out dominant in this latest push to the national championship. Unhittable at times. And somebody got 2 strikes. Well, strike 3, you're out. And I think, what was it, you or somebody said it was how fitting it was. Yeah, I think you tweeted with our account how fitting it was that it was a swinging strike 3, the final pitch that she throws at Oklahoma to win another national championship. And it was fitting, given the way that this, her career and time in Norman, Oklahoma, from the first moment, John, that I saw her with Nebraska Gold right at Marita Hines. The very next week, went on air, told Plank, told anybody that would listen in the ref army, this kid is special. It was so obvious. I mean, against all-star caliber players, she made it look easy. And it was that way to where, final pitch is a swinging strikeout. And, the clip that was making the rounds, John, in light of all of this, from her podcast appearance on the Max Out Mindset, where she was open and honest, and I thought brave in being open and honest in that respect, that prior to last season, now I think it's easy to connect the dots that there was some legitimate homesickness involved in all of it, but to just feel like, why am I not competitive anymore? I don't have the same fire. That is, I can only imagine that's a scary place to be when you're Jordy Ball or you're an elite competitor, elite athlete. And yet that was where Jordy Ball was at. So just obviously join Sooner Nation in wishing her the absolute best. Can we start diving into what this means for Oklahoma softball? I know that it's almost, you've been sort of, to a degree, a crazy day to be a part of from a broadcasting standpoint, first of all, to watch this. Is this going to happen? And then as it, started to kind of unfold to where, yeah, it is going to happen, just wild. And I think that we've gotten, not to be like crass about this, we've gotten a lot of the niceties out of the way from Sooner Nation. And now we can start thinking about, okay, to some degree talking about, okay, what does this mean for Oklahoma softball? What does this mean for the sport of college softball? I hate it for OU. Greedily, I hate it for OU. But there is a part of this, John, to where, there's a lot of people out there nationally that are going to applaud this thing because of what it does for college softball. It sounds like it's going to be Nebraska. I know that that's not an official, result just yet, but it feels that way based on the statement that Jordy put out there. And automatically, I think she elevates Nebraska to what Stanford was or close to.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to go ahead and slot Nebraska into the NCAA tournament next year. I mean, they'll be a competitive team and have a great chance at making the Women's College World Series. If they can add some offense to go along with that, then it really puts them in a really strong position to be a contender next year. We'll continue to dive into what this means for Oklahoma, the sport of college softball, after we talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel.
Well, the NBA playoffs, NBA finals, as we're live right now, going on as we speak. And looks like, I don't know, Miami was on their way to maybe early forcing game 6, so we'll see how it plays out. But whether it's you making a fast break to FanDuel for the NBA playoffs, which NBA finals right now, Stanley Cup final, maybe one more to go there, whether it's making a fast break to FanDuel for the NBA finals or the Stanley Cup final, new customers, you get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's right. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to bet on all of the NBA final, Stanley Cup final action. There's no better place to bet on any of it other than America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel. And of course, it's baseball season, baby. Major League Baseball. You got plenty of options out there for baseball season. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get your no sweat first bet up to $2,500. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So what, just generally speaking, is it okay? I mean, it's not, I don't want to be insensitive because obviously there's a homesickness layer involved, and Jordy was very open and honest about some of the things that she struggled with. Not necessarily, I mean, I guess to some degree in her social media response, but more so in the podcast appearance. But what do you make of all of this for OU? I mean, you're losing a figure that, to me, with Jordy Ball on this roster for Oklahoma, they're so clearly the head and shoulders favorite again going into next season. And not that they're not now, but they're not quite to that degree. So what does this mean for OU softball? What does it mean for the sport, John?
I do think this kind of brings Oklahoma back to the pack a little bit. Not so much that they're, a 10 to 25 ranked team in the nation, but I think it brings them closer to UCLA, to Florida State, to Tennessee. I mean, remember, this is still the #1 offense in college softball, the #1 defense in college softball. Now you're losing Grace Lyons. That matters. That's a big loss at shortstop, but we're in the early days of the transfer portal. So we know that Patty Gasso is going to have answers, but it does have an impact. You can't lose a pitcher of Jordy Ball's quality and it not have an impact. Now, Nicole May was fantastic this year. She was really, really, really good. She was for a long time leading Oklahoma in ERA up until like the last couple weeks of the season. That's how good she was. You got great innings out of Alex Tarraco, Kirsten Deal. She was really good in relief appearances. And then you're also bringing, you got SJ Guerin, who didn't pitch for you at all this year, but she was the number 20 ranked player in the 2023 class. So this is a really good, they've got a couple really good young pitchers in Deal and Guerin. Although Guerin, we haven't seen anything yet, but 2 lefty pitchers, which is really unique, I feel like. But it gives them a chance to kind of start developing these kids and let them start to build their confidence and get themselves ready for future NCAA tournaments and Women's College World Series. But you really look to Nicole May. And I think she showed you a lot this year that she could be a frontline starter for 99% of the teams in college softball. Now she needs to take another step forward. She needs to ascend from good to great to elite, for Oklahoma to maintain their top spot. What's interesting to me is that, in the 2021, 2022 seasons, they didn't really have a pitcher pitching as dominantly as Jordy Ball did this postseason. Giselle Juarez, she was great, 2 years ago. And then last year it was Hope Troutwine. She was really, really good. But again, they weren't as dominant as Jordy Ball was this postseason. So it gives them, or it puts them in a position where it's like, okay, we've got to improve our offense to maintain that same level of offensive effectiveness. And we've got to develop Nicole May, develop Kirsten Deal, develop SJ Guerin, and then maybe even still go to the transfer portal and look to add a significant arm like they did this last offseason. So that's kind of where they're at. I'm not going to bet against them and count them out, but are they going to be as dominant as they were this year? Maybe not. Are they going to be able to win as many close games as they did this year? We'll see. But still, it's Oklahoma. They're going to be the favorite until somebody else proves that they're worthy of being the favorite. But it would not surprise me to see Patty Gasso make some big splashes in the transfer portal.
Well, and I just wonder, is this right that Oklahoma signed 4 in its 2023 class? I mean, I'm looking at this piece from November, and I guess the group would be Maya Bland from Texas, and Nellie McEnroe Marinas. Let's see, Ella Parker, who I know people are very, very excited about, and Cassidy Pickering. And unless I'm missing something here, none of these are a pitcher, right? None of these players. Right. So, obviously, that part of it, you had a plan in place that clearly you can't totally plan for when somebody like Jordy Ball, that was the best pitcher, is the best pitcher for my money in college softball, and that's with Nigel Kennedy involved as well. Now all of a sudden you lose that, so that sends you scrambling a little bit. But hey, we've seen this in the past with Troutwine coming here, with other transfers here, whether it's a Lowry, on and on and on. Oklahoma will find a good arm out of the transfer portal. We don't know who it is yet, but I would imagine that Oklahoma will find somebody. I can't fathom it would be too difficult of a sell to say, hey, do you want to come pitch for the 3-time defending national champions, a program that 6 times over the last decade has won a national championship? And oh, by the way, they have all this talent coming back around you. So it's going to be a very, very attractive situation. And obviously it makes sense for Jordy, what the allure, what the attraction would be to go home to potentially build up Nebraska. The other part of it, softball news before we hop to what's clearly broken out there as well today, which is Derek LeBlanc. Sophia Nugent, I guess just part of the unintended consequence to a good decision of Kinsey Hansen returning.
That's my guess. Sophia Nugent would have probably kind of been the player in waiting at catcher, but with Hansen coming back for another year, maybe she's just not wanting to wait. And I mean, she came in the same class as Jordy Ball. So who knows how much that relationship factored in. And with Jordy Ball, going out and heading to Nebraska, heading home. Sorry, I keep wanting to say Nebraska, but we don't know that for a certainty yet. But with Jordy Ball heading out, maybe Sophia just thought, hey, this is my chance to find a new spot as well. So that's kind of where I stand on it. Kinsey Hansen coming back, that's huge. Absolutely. We talked about it on the show yesterday for all the everydayers. You heard some of our thoughts on that, but I mean, that's as big of a return as you could have. I mean, a great season this year. She finished 3rd on the team in batting average. She had 13 home runs. She had upwards of, I think it was just over 50 RBIs or close to 50 RBIs. Can't remember off the top of my head now, but she was as clutch as of a hitter as there was in the postseason. She was, she had 57 RBIs. Thank you. She was everything you needed her to be and helped bring along this pitching staff, and is going to be a big part of bridging the gap without Jordy Ball in developing Kirsten Deal, Nicole May, SJ Guerin, whoever the transfer portal addition is going to be. I mean, Kinsey Hanson's a big part of that. And I really think probably the most likely candidate to get the captaincy after Grace Lyons departs.
Just in closing, I guess, on this subject, John, it maybe would be remiss. I don't know if I mentioned this level of sports shock on this. Incredibly high with Jordy Ball. I mean, you start yesterday, midway through the day to the evening, you start really hearing some rumors start heating up. You start trying to tap into some sources here and there, and all of a sudden by day's end into this morning, it was a pretty strong reality that maybe this could actually happen with Jordy Ball. But even with all of that, for it to in fact happen, I don't know what you compare it to. It's a superstar, not, but even then it was getting floated like Jordy Ball might leave the sport at the height of her power. And that was a realistic thing that was getting talked about out there, which would have been, it would have been almost, it would have just been crazy. All of it's kind of wild and crazy to believe to begin with, but for somebody to be who Jordy Ball is in this sport and potentially to walk away from it is shocking. And it puts a lot of maybe where the headspace was at and mentally some of the struggles emotionally that Jordy was going through. I mean, it puts it into perspective when you think about, okay, this is the best pitcher in the game and they're willing to give it all up. So that part of it was just crazy. I'm happy that she hasn't, it appears, made that choice. I think she's got an opportunity, whether here or at Nebraska or wherever, to really make some, in name, image, and likeness, some life-altering money. And I would hate for her to give that up, though. Again, I would never suggest or advocate for anybody to do anything that they hate. I mean, if you've lost the fire or the passion for it, don't do it. But it just, all of this was, again, sports shock. Oh, I mean, tippity top.
Well, the first I heard about it was from you, and when you texted me about it, and I'm at work, and my response was, "Shut up!" Like, I couldn't believe that it was going to happen. I think, okay, so I hate to even put them in the same sentence, but it felt a lot like Caleb Williams leaving. But with Caleb Williams, it was almost assumed that he was going to leave, right? I think most people were hoping that he'd stay, but just felt like, okay, the tie to Lincoln Riley was too close. But as far as sports shock goes, I mean, I kind of have to put it in the same vein as Lincoln Riley leaving. Like, I was absolutely floored when Lincoln Riley left, and I think everybody was. And I think that's the same thing. Now we have much different reactions, responses. We feel better about Jordy Ball going, and as opposed to Lincoln leaving, she went out the kind of the right way, as opposed to Link. Like, all these rumors about being in touch with USC for months prior to the decision, making the decision and not talking to the players, but briefly, Jordy Ball went and talked to the coaching staff on the Friday, let everybody know where she was at. And the coaching staff gave her their blessing to go. And it's a totally different vibe. But as far as sports shock goes, it's kind of the thing I can relate to in recent years. But yeah, I hope for her sake that she is going to continue to play, because you can tell she loves to play. She loves to compete. If it just needs to be in a place that's closer to her mom and dad, closer to, people that she loves, then by all means go be there. Her dad, he's one of the coolest follows on Twitter. If you haven't followed him, he's just a super supportive guy. And he even, shared his appreciation for Sooner Nation after this all went down, and which I thought was just really, really neat. So that's kind of where I'd put it as far as sports shock goes. Yeah, I don't know how else to really relate to it. There have been a lot of shocking moments over the last couple decades, but maybe David Hicks committing to Texas A&M, that was kind of shocking. But we're not nearly as emotionally tied to David Hicks like we are Jordy Ball. So maybe it's not nearly as shocking. I don't know.
Well, and it's not for quote unquote a Locked On Sooners conversation, but Kevin Durant choosing Golden State. I mean, that to me was like, no way he would pick there, but and sure enough, he did. And this is not like that, but just in terms of, being floored with the decision, it was, I mean, it felt that way. And, my big charge, final thing I'll say on this topic, I know, it just happened today. You say that a couple of times. It's like, well, there's more to say, but my big charge all day was it's a massive life decision. And if you're really thinking about giving up the sport or you're thinking about transferring, maybe it's worth taking a deep breath, not entering the transfer portal today or entering the transfer portal and just not making the decision on where you're going or you're definitively going. Because a lot of times with big life decisions, unfortunately, when you're younger, you have a habit to make rapid life decisions very quickly at times. Just speaking for myself, and I think probably others can back that sentiment up as well. And so anyways, that's all of that is to say that it sounds like Jordy, just the heart and the mind is made up. And you know what? If that's the case and it's been on the heart and it's been on the mind, then more power to her.
Okay, now we're going to talk some football stuff. We're going to have a lot to say about Jordy Ball as this continues. We'll follow her career. Best of luck to her. But we got to talk Derek LeBlanc because that's the other shocking news that came out this afternoon. Matt Zenitz of On3 reported that Derek LeBlanc is entering the transfer portal, which to me, I'm like, wait, the transfer portal's closed, but I guess you can get a waiver to transfer. I don't know. It's all complicated. Who knows what the rules are anymore? I feel like it's whose line is it anyway, where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. It feels exactly like what that is right now. LeBlanc leaving, man, there's so many like people putting out thoughts and rumors and innuendo about what this could mean. Man, who knows? It could just as much mean the dude wants to go back to Florida to be close to people that he knows and loves and cares about, similar to Jordy Ball. Or it could be some of the things that are true here. The thing that makes the most sense, the thing that I can point to objectively, is that Oklahoma did do a lot this offseason to add defensive line talent through the transfer portal. Jacob Lacey out of Notre Dame, Davin Sears out of Texas State. They brought in Dejon Terry out of Tennessee. They brought in Philip Paya out of Utah State, added Rondo Bothroyd out of Wake Forest. So they were not shy about their intention of building and stockpiling this defensive line. You talk about what's coming in the future with David Stone, with Nigel Smith, with Williams Nwaneri. The writing's on the wall. Like if you're hoping to get playing time, you better up your game. You better be ready to compete because we're just going to add talent. It doesn't matter who's here, who's not here, who's been here, who's coming. Get ready to compete because we're not shy about adding talent here.
It just feels so weird, doesn't it? And who was the other not blue chip kid, but in the first class that they signed late, the defensive tackle that signed with OU and then immediately transferred the following year?
Alton Tarber.
Yeah. So Alton Tarber is who I was trying to think of. It you don't get totally bent out of shape. And I do agree with a little bit of the thinking out there that Oklahoma has lost a player here that has 0 snaps, 0 tackles, 0 TFLs, 0 sacks, 0 pressures, all of it, right? This is somebody that has not played for Oklahoma. So that part of it, from that standpoint, and not to be disrespectful to Derek LeBlanc, but just from a production standpoint for Oklahoma has technically lost nothing from that standpoint. But for me, it's hard to separate the fact that this program, you do want to, even though you've brought all these transfer portal additions in, and maybe that did scare LeBlanc off. And that's not the greatest, to me, ringing endorsement on Derek LeBlanc, that a program could go get some older guys out of the transfer portal. And you as a true freshman, that's enough to scare you off. And all of a sudden you run away. But that being said, it's, I don't want to say alarming for Oklahoma yet, but this habit continues, this cycle continues where defensive linemen don't stick around for more than, 1-2 years. I mean, that part of it, I see a lot of people chalking it up to, well, he couldn't handle the Schmitty workouts, or he wanted to move home, or didn't like the transfer portal acquisitions. And maybe it's a combination of all of those things are true, but at its core, it's almost as though the Sooner fan base to some bit is trying to justify this as, it's not that big of a deal. And maybe it's not that big of a deal. And maybe Derek LeBlanc isn't going to be the star, but it's hard for me today to sit here and feel like this is somehow not bad news for Oklahoma, John.
When you haven't had elite interior defensive line play for a long time, any guy leaving matters. When you, especially if it's a 4-star guy that people are high on. Now, this is a kid that his recruiting ranking kind of tailed off a little bit as the cycle wore down, but the talent was still there. And this is a guy that even Todd Bates was talking highly of in the spring. I can remember, thinking back to how Bates was talking about him as a cerebral player, just saying he just needed to add weight, add strength, get more functional to be able to play on the inside. And maybe, some of it was he wasn't going to be patient enough to get his body up to be ready to go. Maybe he wanted to play on the edge. Who knows, man? There's so many things that it could be that none of us really, really know. Only Derek LeBlanc knows. And maybe at some point we'll get to ask that question, or somebody will ask that question. But this is what it is. This is kind of the new nature of college football. Now, this happened a lot sooner than I expected. Like, if a kid's going to transfer, you expect him to at least sit, be there 1 year and then transfer, like we saw several guys do. But this is just the way it is. And Derek LeBlanc wasn't happy for whatever reason with this situation and wanted to change it. And he's got that ability and that power to do so. Just like coaches have that ability to just up and change their situation at a moment's notice, the players have that power now. And I think it levels the playing field a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't work out. They talk about the thousands of kids that put their name into the portal every year and how many of them don't end up on a team. I mean, that's stuff that kids are going to have to start taking into consideration at some point before they enter the portal, because it's not paying off. And I don't mean that financially. It's not paying off with a scholarship offer for, another school or to play at another school a lot of times for these kids. So it's just, I think I don't want to sit here and trash an 18-year-old kid. I'm going to try really, really hard not to. But what it comes down to is he didn't want to compete. And whether that's he just didn't want to compete at Oklahoma, or he wanted to play earlier, whatever it is, Oklahoma wasn't the spot for him. And he might turn out to be a great player at UCF or Florida or wherever he ends up, but Oklahoma wasn't the spot. It wasn't a good fit. And sometimes that's just the way it goes, and better to rip the Band-Aid off sometimes early than to play out the string and everybody be frustrated and it just not work out. Sometimes it's just better to rip that Band-Aid off as soon as you know.
And I would just say, for me, not even playing devil's advocate or this or that, but I think JD saying here has got an interesting point, and it's because of the 6 and 7 season to some regard. And I hope that it doesn't come across, maybe it does, that we're hating on Derek LeBlanc, but really what we're doing is, or what I'm trying to do is relay to you what people are speculating out there, which is he couldn't handle the Schmitty workouts. It was a situation where he wanted to play straight away. I mean, there's a lot of people saying these types of things, whether or not it's on a founded basis or not. I'm not here to suggest that it is or it isn't. I'm just telling you that people are saying that out there. So not hating on the kid, just saying that that's out there. People are talking about that, whether that's right, wrong, or the other. Ultimately, I think gets back to this point from JD right here. What about the coaches that evaluated and recruited Derek LeBlanc? I mean, isn't it fair if we get a little bit further down the road, Todd Bates and Brent Venables and Miguel Chavis, it is what it is. We don't know. We don't know for somebody that hasn't produced and is a true freshman, might be a star somewhere else, might never hear about Derek LeBlanc again. We're just going to have to let time run its course and tell us later. But it's at least, I guess, for me, where I'm at today, John, I don't want to say the alarm bells have sounded on any of this, but my antennas are raised a little bit that you brought in an Alton Tarber. Okay, he's gone. You brought in a Derek LeBlanc. Okay, he's gone. You're going this transfer portal route. we've sat here and said that, the lifeblood of this thing does need to be high school signees. And so, again, I'm not going to say hit the panic button. I do think if somebody did do that, there would be a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that, frankly, 2022 did not go well for Oklahoma. So proceed with caution from that standpoint. But this is another one of those happenings for me that if we get, a year further down the road or 2 years further down the road and things don't work in this regime, John, I think this is a moment we're going to revisit.
Yeah, this one, and again, we keep going back to the 2024 defensive line recruitment. This is going to be huge. How Oklahoma proceeds and how well they do in 2024 with David Stone, with Nigel Smith, with Williams and that's going to set the tone for them going into the SEC. You don't want to lose any talented players. So whether it's they misevaluated him and that's why it wasn't a good fit, well, then they still misevaluated him. And that's on the coaching staff. Whether it's he wasn't living up to expectations or he wasn't doing the work, again, that's still a misevaluation because work ethic is part of the evaluation. That you talk to NFL scouts as they're going to, and they're looking at college, college prospects. It's not just what you can see on tape. It's the intangibles too. It's what they do off the field. It's what they do in the weight room, in the film room to get themselves ready to play on Sunday, or in this instance on Saturday for the Oklahoma Sooners. So, if LeBlanc wasn't a good fit, that's partly on the coaches too, because they believed he was, and it turned out that he wasn't. So it's not all on Derek LeBlanc. Some of it is on this coaching staff. And yes, there are people, Todd Bates. I mean, I don't think he's going to be on the hot seat anytime soon, but he needs kind of a win. He really hasn't had a win yet. We're kind of looking at an underrated under the radar prospects. I'm a big Ashton Sanders fan. If you've been listening to this show since last fall, my belief in the dude and his ability to make game-changing plays at the interior defensive line position. I believe that. I believe in him. Our guys that cover recruiting down in Florida, in particular, John Garcia, if you listen back to some of those shows, talking about Marcus Strong, who was an under-the-radar defensive tackle prospect in the class. He's very high on him. So it's not all lost, but you're banking on these guys that are under-evaluated prospects in Ashton Sanders and Marcus Strong being game-changing players for you at the college level. I believe Ashton Sanders can be that. I think he's got the traits to be a very disruptive defensive tackle, but he's got to put it on the field. And we may not see it in 2023, probably not until 2024, 2025. And then, you still have a decent kind of group to work with. Grayson Halton in particular. That's a guy that Todd Bates spoke really highly of. He was very productive in the spring game. And so this is a Todd Bates flip, actually. He was committed to Oregon. Todd Bates lured him to Oklahoma. So if we can dump on Todd Bates and how, okay, it didn't work out with David Hicks. It didn't work out with Derek LeBlanc, but we got Grayson Halton. Now it's got to show up and it's got to be productive in 23 and 24 for us to start feeling really good about this. But Grayson Halton was a 4-star prospect that was committed to Oregon. That's a big time college football program. And that's a West Coast kid deciding to come to Middle America to ply his craft. He's got the juice, man. We saw it in the spring game. He's a very productive player. You just got to keep building on what he's done this spring, carry it over into the fall, and potentially he could be a very good pass rushing asset for you this season even. And as he continues to develop, be even better and be more ready to take over and be a dominant player as you go into the SEC. So I think that's where, yes, it's a bummer. Like you don't want to lose blue chip prospects in a recruiting class, but there's a lot of things that go into that. But Oklahoma's cupboard's not completely bare. Again, Grayson Halton, a potential big time player. The pass rush ability is there, and I really like what they've got in their 3-star kids in the 23 cycle. And I think we have a pretty strong feeling that what's coming in the 24 cycle is going to be really, really good. It's just a matter of like bridging the gap now. And yeah, defensive tackle still needs work, but what they're doing on the edge, that's going to be transcendent potentially with PJ Adebare, with Williams and Nigel Smith, our Mason Thomas, dude, that kid is going to be lights out. okay, I'm working on my Big 12, preseason, all Big 12 team for the conference. And I'm having a hard time not putting R. Mason Thomas on that list, because I really think he's about to have this huge breakout season. The more that I think and reflect on what is going to happen at edge, I really think he's going to be lights out. And then when he gets to the SEC teams are going to be mad that Greg Sankey invited Oklahoma to come because of R. Mason Thomas and what he's going to do to SEC offensive tackles. So there's that. Any other thoughts on this, Josh?
Yeah. Well, I hope there's a lot of reasons that Greg Sankey isn't popular with, I don't know. We know that he's already not popular with some folks in College Station, but that's neither here nor there. Can I swing back around, and maybe this is full circle here, and I know you sort of probably led our LeBlanc conversation with a little bit of this, and this is not to pick apart Derek LeBlanc per se, or to say that he couldn't handle Schmitty workouts or on and on and on, that he wanted to play right away, but can we embrace the hypothetical, the positive hypothetical, that maybe Oklahoma has found some pretty good guys out of the transfer portal, or that in Isaiah Coe, a Jordan Kelly have started their ascension? And, oh, by the way, a name that you talked a lot about, Grayson Halton, has gotten bigger, stronger, better. Gilliam, right? Laulu, Devon Sears, Dejon Terry, Jacob Lacey. I mean, there's a lot of names to think about in that defensive line room, a couple of which we've seen produce, maybe definitely not to a star caliber, but I like what we've seen, and we've talked about that before, both Isaiah Coe and Jordan Kelly. So if you get one or a couple of those younger guys all of a sudden to start morphing into a star, then this Derek LeBlanc thing, it can quickly be, I don't want to say totally forgotten. And as I said earlier, to me, depending upon what happens, this could be a moment we circle back to and say, okay, well, wait a second, this was an alarming moment, but it also could be a positive sign, right? I mean, we just don't know yet. So where do you stand with all of that? And as we just kind of look at the board for Oklahoma's defensive interior linemen, I mean, what do you think about Coe and Kelly and on and on and on?
I mean, I think Coe and Kelly really showed promise last year as they got more and more snaps. Now I need to see them do more. It's been good, but you don't have the Perrion Winfrey, Jalen Redmond, Neville Gallimore that you feel really good about. You have a really solid floor with. You're kind of projecting that Isaiah Coe and Jordan Kelly take a step forward. Jacob Lacey, I'm not sure. That's one of those guys that I kind of want to see before I put a whole lot of stock in what he could do. Todd Bates had been really, really high on Jonah Laula moving into defensive tackle. I mean, he's got a lot of athleticism, and he's got the strength to be able to play on the inside. Can he do it on a full-time level? That's going to be really interesting to follow. I mean, we talked about Dejon Terry, like having a legit 325-pound defensive tackle that can play the nose. That just opens things up to more properly slot your other interior defensive line players where they need to play, as opposed to playing a 290 guy at nose tackle. Davin Sears, I know it was Texas State, but when Penn State's coming after you, Tennessee's coming after you, I think that's significant. So potentially they've got a good group of players. Now, which one of these guys is going to really step up and be that significant difference maker? We'll see. Maybe Isaiah Coe. But I think they've got a good group of guys where they could have a solid 6-man rotation at the interior defensive line and kind of keep everybody fresh so that they can play at 100% capacity every single snap, throwing numbers at a problem sort of a thing, where you hope that guys rise to the occasion and you can maybe better kind of game plan guys a little bit better against certain teams. When you're playing against, I don't know who, BYU or Baylor, you're probably going to see a lot of Dejon Terry, because they're going to be teams that want to run the football and run it a lot and play and be physical at the point of attack. You're playing a team like Texas Tech. Maybe you want more speed on the interior. You want more pass rush ability on the interior. And so you're probably seeing a lot more Isaiah Coe, a lot more, Grayson Halton. So I think they're going to be some matchup dependent, defensive line alignments on the interior, especially just depending on who they play and week to week, what's the best matchup for them. I think it's okay. I think it's going to be okay. again, a lot of things have to be better. One of those things is interior defensive line.
You nailed it right there. That final piece. Here we can sit and look at the LeBlanc decision and break this position group because naturally we would, right? LeBlanc is moving on, and what does this mean? And is this alarming for recruiting? On and on and on. And then all of a sudden you're doing a State of the Union on the defensive tackles at the University of Oklahoma. But really, to me, here's sort of how this is my Cliff Notes how I would break down defensive tackle at Oklahoma right now. I am under no illusions that they're good enough to go win a national championship with their defensive tackles where they're at, but I think they're plenty good enough to go compete in the Big 12 and maybe win the Big 12 championship. And I think they're plenty good enough to be vastly, vastly improved defensively if, again, everything around it improves. So we're talking defensive tackle right now, but guess what? Edge rush needs to improve. Danny Stutzman needs to keep ascending. The guys around Danny Stutzman need to keep ascending. Dasan McCullough needs to be a star for this defense. We think that they've improved safety immensely. And that needs to be the case to where Peyton Bowen is a massive upgrade back there. And then they went and got this Reggie Pearson that can slot right in and help them. And cornerback's been a big time problem. So it's easy in light of this news, I guess is what I'm saying, to hone totally in on defensive tackle. But Oklahoma's defensive issues are larger than one position group. And they're still, in my estimation, good enough to go win this league right now this year as they continue to look to stock the shelves, so to speak, John.
So much of it comes down to if they can just play the run better, it's going to make everything better. Because if they're in more 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10 situations, as opposed to 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4 situations, they're going to be a better defense. But because they had a really, really hard time stopping the run, it made offensive efficiency for their opponents a whole lot easier. You just had to run the ball, get in short down and distances on 3rd down, and you convert. So I do think, like, I went on that State of the Union, but they got to be better. Defensive tackles, we need you to be better. You've got to be better in 2023. Sorry, that's my bad JFK impersonation. But I do think it's going to be better. I think defensively, it's all going to be better because the talent is going to be better. The guys that are returning are going to be better because they've got more experience now. So it's gonna get better. DG and Coach Roof will be our downfall. I hope I'm wrong.
Can I just touch on something real quick? Even with as bad as things were with Trevor Knight, there was almost this layer of dislike and hatred that was larger for Landry Jones than Trevor Knight. Are we entering that territory with Dillon Gabriel? I mean, it feels like if this, and maybe this is something you can explore for Sooners Wire, John, because I think that it's a fascinating topic. And I probably wouldn't title the story, hey, who are the most disliked quarterbacks at OU recently? But Dillon Gabriel to me is, I don't even know that I'd say polarizing. I would probably say it's more slanted that folks are sort of down and out on Dillon Gabriel, and the minority, though it's probably relatively close to 50-50, are like, well, wait a second, Dillon Gabriel's no scrub out here for Oklahoma. Thank you very much, TLC. But this year, if it goes poorly for Dillon Gabriel and for Oklahoma, I think he's going to leave OU regarded just like a Trevor Knight or worse, or Landry Jones or worse. Even if he rolls up 3,500 yards and Oklahoma goes 7-5, this tenure with Dillon Gabriel is not going to be appreciated at all, is it?
No. I would say that he'd probably be more in the vein of Trevor Knight. I think history is remembering Landry Jones a little bit better than they did at the time. I'll count myself as one of those people that was really frustrated with Landry Jones during his tenure, but he was a good quarterback. He was really, really good. He just happened to follow Sam Bradford, who is arguably the best quarterback Oklahoma's ever had throwing the football. But I mean, there were things that Landry Jones did, throwing off his back foot, and throwing interceptions, skying the football, that were really frustrating me. Every once in a while in the fall, I'll get a Facebook memory that pops up from 12 years ago about Landry Jones. And I'm like, oh, John. But yeah, I do think like
Facebook memories, not a good thing for any of us. No, I don't think,
especially our sports takes. But I do think if Dillon Gabriel if the Oklahoma Sooners don't get back to a Big 12 title game, then yeah, he probably has the chance to be kind of remembered like a Trevor Knight. But I think Dillon Gabriel's been more efficient, more productive than Knight was, aside from that one game against Alabama. Like the quarterback play during the Blake Bell, Trevor Knight era was about as low as it got during the Bob Stoops era. It was just not great. And Dillon Gabriel's been good. And I think a lot of what we hear about Dillon Gabriel comes from a very vocal minority. I think most people think he's a good quarterback, but he's not Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams, or maybe even Spencer Rattler at this point, or maybe he is Spencer Rattler, but he's just been good. He hasn't been great yet. And the bar for Oklahoma quarterbacks is set so high that if you're not great and you're not a Heisman Trophy contender, then you're just kind of, you're kind of okay. And and we don't really settle for anything less than Heisman Trophy contender, which is kind of unrealistic, but it's just the standard that's been created at Oklahoma. I just hope that at some point we kind of have some realistic expectations. Now, I do think that he's got to get better on third down. He's got to get better at crossing routes. He's got to get more efficient in the passing game, complete a higher percentage of passes, but he's a good quarterback. You've got one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 this year, one of the top 10 to 15 quarterbacks in the country. So you've got a good enough quarterback to win. He wasn't the reason that you lost last year. Did he have moments where he could have been better? Sure. But when your defense is giving up 30 points per game, your quarterback shouldn't be required to score 40, 45, 50 every single time for you to have a chance to win.
Well, and I think it's fair to say quarterback gets a bunch of the blame, and yet Jeff Lebby at times, just offensively, it's got to be everybody pulling on the same rope, helping each other out a little bit. I mean, whether that's the tempo side of things that, hey, I think you and I both and most everybody feels like, okay, tempo is a good thing when it's run the right way, but it's like just the pulse of the game at times offensively was so out of whack for OU last season, and that falls maybe on Dillon Gabriel's shoulders, but probably equally so or more so or same amount with Jeff Lebby's shoulders. And the play calling, I mean, can you lean on the run game a little bit more here in bits and pieces? The offensive line, I mean, how much better is that going to be running the football, or is it going to be the same in pass protection? How far along, how quickly does that come? I mean, it's all going to work in tandem together. It's not just Dillon Gabriel, I guess what I'm saying. And Jeff Lebby and this offensive line, they got to help him out a little bit.
100%, especially when your defense is struggling. You can't go 3 and out in 30 seconds. Like, you just can't do that. Being a little bit better with game awareness is something this whole team needs to have. And some of that comes down to the quarterback. Like, the most important thing you can do in this offense is get first downs. And they weren't efficient enough on third down to get enough first downs for this offense to be as good as it could have been. And that's the thing that has to get better. Third down efficiency, red zone efficiency. This team is a lot better if they can improve those two areas. People commenting that everybody wants Jackson Arnold. The recruits want Jackson Arnold. And Jackson Arnold's going to be great. But I don't think this is going to be his year. I think Jeff Lebby's kind of loyal to Dillon Gabriel, is going to give him the chance. I don't think he's going to have a short leash like Lincoln Riley did with Spencer Rattler. I think that he's going to be good enough. Like, the schedule is not daunting. And so Dillon Gabriel is going to be good enough to win a lot of games for the Oklahoma Sooners and have them scoring a lot of points, because you don't play, teams that are going to be elite defensive squads this year, at least on paper. And so I really think that it's going to be a moot point because the schedule doesn't necessarily scare you in such a way that you're like, oh man, we got to get somebody out of there. We got to get Dillon Gabriel out of there because he's just having such a bad game. Yeah, that's just kind of where I stand on it. I think it's going to be fine. Dillon Gabriel is going to be fine. The offense is going to be fine. A lot of it comes down to how good the offensive line is going to be, which, again, Bill Bedenbaugh, it's going to be fine.
So this week will be, I mean, talk about a massive news week in Oklahoma with this Jordy Ball news, and obviously Derek LeBlanc right afterwards. And then, I mean, what Wednesday is. Wednesday, we're going to get a peek at the SEC schedule coming up. So I guess in lieu of, because I don't see a bunch of questions that folks are still asking in the chat, I'll ask the chat a question before we sign off of here, John. And I get it. This is something that maybe has been asked before. This is not a totally original question, but it's the final time we get to ask it before we get some, maybe not the chronological order of this thing, but before we get some answers on what Oklahoma's initial SEC schedule looks like. So what's everybody want here? I mean, we know it's 8 games. What is everybody rooting for on this thing? I'll start just by saying, I mean, obviously you got Texas, which is good. And then beyond that, I'm hoping for some fireworks. I want to see an Alabama or a Georgia in year one. I want a trip to Death Valley in year one versus LSU. I've been pretty vocal, I feel like, as well, that Arkansas, to me, is an obvious candidate. Now, it's the way they've structured this thing. It's not going to morph into a protected opponent, if you want to call it that, or an annual rivalry with Arkansas. But just because of the proximity and the way, look, if you have spent any time in the state of Arkansas wearing OU gear and have gotten a sideways remark or two, you know that there's some legitimate, not so friendly like toward Oklahoma in the state of Arkansas. So that to me is such an obvious candidate to have, I don't even friendly dislike or just legitimate dislike to it. So that's a game that I'd love to see either there or here in year one.
You got to get Arkansas on the schedule, man. That to me is a no-brainer. I'm out here in Eastern Oklahoma, and my wife's from out here, and similarly, like the jokes about Arkansas, I mean, that they just come up, and it's such close proximity. Like Fayetteville is the closest SEC school to Oklahoma, to Norman. You got to get them on the schedule. I really think that if they go to a 3 permanent rival schedule eventually, that's got to be one of them. You got to play Arkansas every year. Just build up that regional rivalry, build that up into the next kind of bedlam. If you're not going to have bedlam anytime soon, then let Arkansas be that for Oklahoma, that regional rivalry. I'd really like to see a trip to Athens, man. Just baptism by fire, going up against the 2022, 2023 national, or 21, 22 national champions, and just see what you got. It's Jackson Arnold probably up against Georgia and Kirby Smart. It may not go well, but let's see what we got, right? Play the best. Don't shy away from anything. It's going to be an expanded playoff, so one loss on the road isn't going to kill you necessarily, but also strength of schedule can help you. So yeah, man, give me the Bulldogs in Athens, Oklahoma making that road trip. That'd be just too much fun.
Jog my memory here. Was it Georgia or Tennessee that was slated initially on the 24 schedule and it got wiped because of the obvious announcement that you were joining the league? Was it Tennessee or Georgia?
It was Tennessee. I thought it was Georgia at first, but it's actually Tennessee. Georgia was supposed to be 2023, which got replaced with SMU, and then Tennessee was 2024. So, but yeah, man, and then give me Heupel. I've talked about this before, but give me Josh Heupel to Norman. Like, we need to have that reunion already.
Well, I mean, that is so obviously a tailor-made year one game for Oklahoma joining the SEC just because of the Heupel factor and the awkwardness and the made-for-television element to it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely going to happen. I will be shocked if Oklahoma does not host Tennessee in its first year in the SEC.
Yeah. You'll get Tennessee or Kentucky just to have the family affair in Norman at least one time before, Mark Stoops potentially gets, fired out there in Lexington. But a few recruiting notes before we get out of here, Josh, because we got it on the block. We got to talk about it. Ivan Carrion, the Texas Tech wide receiver commit, who had kind of been trending toward Oklahoma. At least that was the buzz. It looks like, according to Parker Thune over at OU Insider, that is not the case, that he's kind of trending back towards Lubbock and Texas Tech. So kind of sign that one, or, scratch that one off your wide receiver depth chart for 2024. But they did offer Dozie Ezukanma, the little brother to Eric Ezukanma, the Texas Tech wide receiver great from recent years. Dozie is a 3-star wide receiver out of the Fort Worth area, played at Keller Central, also is going to be at All Saints Episcopal this next season. But again, a lot of the same traits that Eric Ezekanma had, Dozie's got as well. Athletic player, good route runner, able to make plays above the rim as well. And then, Zion Reagans continues the trend for Oklahoma. It doesn't seem like that's going away anytime soon. And we're going to have Brian Smith on the show. Josh is going to speak with him tomorrow afternoon, on Tuesday afternoon, for your show on Wednesday here on the Locked On Sooners podcast. So make sure you're tuned in to that show wherever you get your podcast. But we'll ask Brian about the last weekend of visitors, the upcoming Champ U barbecue, Zion Reagans, Derek LeBlanc. Brian's located down there in Florida, so he'll have a good indication about what's going on with Derek LeBlanc, where he might be headed as well, and what Oklahoma's prospects are looking like in the Florida area now that Stacey Gage is off the board. What's it look like with Tavani Mazzell, other running backs in the class? So make sure you're tuned in and subscribed to Locked On Sooners wherever you get your podcast. Josh, any thoughts on the recruiting bits before we get out of here?
Well, somebody actually, the one thing I was going to say, Nuggets win. Yes. Congratulations to the Denver Nuggets, your NBA finals,
Joker,
your NBA champions, the Joker, baby, a Joker we can all root for.
There's just something sweet about a Euro big beating the Miami Heat. I just love it. In the same year that they also beat the Lakers, man, it's just takes me back to a better time when my Dallas Mavericks had Dirk Nowitzki in the 2011 season. All was right with the world, and then Mark Cuban blew it up, let Tyson Chandler go away. But congrats to the Nuggets and Jokic, man. It's great to see people finally jumping on the train that he's an elite ball player in the same way that they finally did with Dirk during that 2011 run.
Rings, man, you go get and especially, I mean, similarly, but maybe not quite the same, because Jamal Murray, I think people would argue, is a little bit more of a option B or a number 2 than maybe Jet was during that championship run for Dirk. So Dirk, I would give a little bit of a leg up just in terms of the impressive nature of his championship title run. But yeah, I mean, you go lead a team to a ring, and all of a sudden that legacy changes a little bit, even though you had the 2 MVPs to your name. So congratulations to the Nuggets. I'm sure I have more to add on the recruiting side, but let's just save it for one Mr. Brian Smith, which you won't want to miss that. He is awesome in terms of the recruiting. We got a lot to talk about with the LeBlanc news and beyond.
Yep. So that show will come to you on Wednesday morning on YouTube and in your podcast feed. So again, make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Hit that notification bell over on YouTube to let you know when new episodes drop, and that subscribe button. Hey, and if you like the show, if you're a fan of what we do here on Locked On Sooners, would you do us a favor and go leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts? Apple review, Google, Spotify, wherever that is. Just give us a 5-star rating, leave us a review. That just helps other people find out about the show, and that's one way that you can support what we do here on Locked On Sooners. So thank you so much for being a part of the show, being here for the live show. We won't have a live show next week. Wife and I, it's our anniversary. So unless Josh decides to do the live show by himself, we're going to be anniversarying. It'll be our 13th wedding anniversary. So we'll be celebrating that. But we'll have plenty of content for you following the Champ U barbecue as well, coming up this weekend. So follow Josh on Twitter at Josh on Ref. Follow myself on Twitter at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners. Again, follow the show on Facebook, Locked On Sooners Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and shoot us your questions in the comments. Shoot us them on Twitter. We'd love to answer them on the show every time that we have a show. So we'll be back with Brian Smith for your Wednesday, and we'll have more content later this week. But that's going to do it for today's episode. Boomer Sooner!